I spawned on top of the abyss and looked around at the vast nothingness that lay around me. I began mining the one block in hopes to gather some essential resources. Whilst doing so, I learned that I could slap the floor to collect pebbles, which I did to later make cobblestone. I kept mining and kept getting various types of animals and pushed them to the side. I worked on expanding the island with all the available blocks I had, just so I would have less chance of falling off. Eventually, I completed the flatland phase and worked my way through the next, which was farmland. Using the pebbles I had gathered previously, I crafted some cobblestone walls and built up an animal coop to house my animals for the near future. The farmland phase granted me many crops that I used to breed the animals on the island, giving me a good source of food. With the completion of the farmland phase, I took my rewards and moved on to the underground phase, getting many ores and other necessary blocks I may need. I decided to craft my first iron pickaxe in hopes to eventually come across some diamonds, and much to my delight, a couple minutes later, the diamonds appeared before me and I snatched them up. In the early hours of day 2, I started expanding the area to allow more possibilities for future builds. Despite mining for a while, I couldn't manage to finish the underground phase as planned. But instead, I worked and planted more trees to gather some wood. To make my life easier, I crafted an iron axe and continued working on gathering wood, that I later used to expand the area a little further. On day 3, I focused on crafting a botany pot in hopes to make my wood collection far easier and passive. I used the crops I had stored away to complete the animal breeding quest and collected up my rewards, which was a pair of spawn eggs of each necessary animal. With these in mind, I decided to make the difficult decision to kill all of the animals on my land and redesign the animal pen to work and look a lot better. Once the pens were built, I used the spawn eggs and separated the animals. I was in desperate need for cobblestone, so for the next several hours I right-clicked the floor to gather as many pebbles as I could. Then once I got bored, I went over and began mining the one block well into the night. I started to progress in my technological advancements and crafted a watermill and millstone. I set up the watermill and powered the millstone, which allowed me to crush ores down. I used my big brain and used the string I had in the chest to make a bed that would benefit me in the long run. I decided to settle down for the first time and sleep, ready for the big day tomorrow. I continued my technological advancements and crafted an encased fan, but kept it in storage for a little while. I went back to the 1 block and successfully completed the underground phase, which now took me to the overworld. I kept mining, and after a while I welcomed 2 new villagers and a frog to the community. I realised that the storage situation needed a bit of work, so I began setup for a dedicated storage area. I put down some chests and retired to my bed for the night. I began sorting the items into the new storage system on day 6, making it a lot easier to locate what I need. I collected some quest rewards, then crafted a lasso with the diamonds I had gathered. I mined the 1 block for a while until a witch appeared, and I snatched it up with the lasso, which I later placed in the iron mob farm for some quick loot. I made sure it worked before settling down and sleeping the night away. I carried on sorting the items into the new storage system on day 7, and finished some basic quests during the move. I decided that today is the day that I would set up the encased fan, so I could get some ore multiplying early on. I tested the fan on some crushed ore and it worked perfectly. I then ended the day by putting a small storage part under the millstone for the grinded resources and slept. Day 8 came around and I continued my mining efforts, mainly looking for dirt for a future project. Throughout the whole of my mining saga, I came across a lot of mobs, some of which were evokers and their minions. They were too strong for me, so I died twice, but eventually I got my revenge on them. During the big fight, I managed to keep hold of a totem of undying. I spent the rest of the day rebuilding the animal pens once again and sorting the animals out, as they seemed to have escaped. I then retired back to my bed to sleep. I spent the early hours of day 9 gathering more dirt from the 1 block, in hopes to see the end of the overworld phase. During this, however, I encountered several more enemies which killed me, but I continued to come back and get my revenge, becoming victorious after each fight. Although I didn't finish the overworld today, I slept well knowing that I made a lot of progress. Day 10 went similarly to the last. I once again found myself under attack from surprising mobs, and died many times before slaying them down. I needed paper for a build later on, so I gathered up some wood and used the cutting board to strip the logs of their bark, which later turned into paper. I then set up an auto-composter setup and made sure it worked before sleeping the darkness away. I used the gathered gems and ingots from the underground phase to craft our first custom paxel on day 11, then used it to gather tons of wood before falling into the void and meeting my unfortunate demise. I respawned and decided to sleep, but I saw that a villager had occupied my bed, so I kicked him out and rested well. I made some progress on day 12 and completed the dirt quest, which rewarded me with grass, which is very useful for later on. I crafted a charging station and a building gadget to complete another quest, but I wasn't too sure on how to use it, so I put it in storage for now. I needed some more dirt for later projects, so I worked on obtaining some dirt seeds and began working on a farm area. And as night approached, I sought rest and decided to sleep peacefully. Day 13 began by continuing with my agricultural efforts. I planted the dirt seeds and other crops, then expanded my farming endeavors and crafted an Inferium seed, which was later planted. As I planted more crops to feed the animals, I decided to relocate the dirt seed and put it into the botany pot, so I will have a passive source of dirt. I thought the area looked a bit bad, so I began working on making improvements and making it look visually appealing, but as night fell fast, I called it a day and slept. I carried on my efforts to improve the area, spending a couple hours working on the floor. I was slowly getting bored of construction work, so I moved on and crafted an infusion crystal, which allowed me to change Inferium to the next levels. With our new crystal, I used it to craft some tertium farmland to speed up the plant growth in our botany pot. As night came, I continued my efforts with the building project and made steady progress to expand the area. Similar to day 14, I carried on with the development of my land, in hopes to clear some more land in the process. The animals seemed to keep escaping, so I picked up the pig and tried to put it back in its pen, but the game decided to stack it on top of a sheep, which I quite enjoyed seeing. Distractions aside, however, I kept working on the area a little more before the sky became dark. The animals looked a little cooped up in small pens, so on day 16 I began work on making a bigger animal farm. For several hours I placed dirt down, and once I'd ran out, I went back to the one block and accumulated more resources for later use. Again, several hours went by and I made the choice to sleep for the night. Day 17 began with the one block. I spent some time mining it and finally completed the overworld phase, transitioning to the astral phase. I spent some time working through that phase and eventually finished that too, moving on to Magicka. I carried on mining through until I came across a formidable wildebeest that attacked me, leading to my demise. I respawned with redemption in mind and defeated the wildebeest before retiring to my bed. Waking up bright and early, I started mining the one block until the Magicka phase was no more, and we moved on to the magic bundle phase. My pick was taking some time to mine some of the blocks, so I decided to upgrade and craft another paxel, in hopes to make it somewhat better than the last. I tested it out, making sure it worked wonders before settling to my bed, ready to recharge my energy for the next day. I woke up on day 19 and decided that today would be the day that I would craft a saw. Saws allow you to chop down several stacks of wood at once, so it would be extremely useful. I used my newly acquired tools to complete the floor of the animal pens and started construction of the walls, before laying down in my bed for a nice sleep. Day 20 came around and I continued my efforts in constructing the pens, which I finally finished. I carefully transferred the animals to their respective pens and sorted them out. I took some crops out of storage and bred the animals to keep the livestock game going strong. My crops, however, were weak, so I worked on expanding my botany pot amount so I could gather any essential crops possible. Then I fixed up the edges of the central circle in pursuit of perfection. I worked until my legs couldn't take it anymore, then went to sleep ready for the new day. I woke up excited as on day 21 I tested the saw for the first time and was delighted by its efficiency in gathering logs. I thought of all the projects I wanted to work on, so I expanded the island to create space for the future endeavours. It was a quiet day for me, and as the day drew to a close, I slept. I crafted an infusion altar on day 22, which allowed me to create essential seeds like iron or even diamond. I established a different area for crops and worked on making it look presentable. I crafted an infusion pedestal, the first of many, and placed it in the correct position. And with nightfall approaching, I retreated to my bed to sleep in peace. Viewing through the quests, I saw something about the Bumble Zone, and on day 23, I set up a small contraption and pushed my body through the beehive. This was the Bumble Zone. I had to make my way through and collect what I wanted or needed, then dig down to the void before the timer ran out, or bad things would happen. I didn't know this, however, and as timer reached 0, I found myself several minutes away from the void, mining downwards with mining fatigue, making it extremely difficult. Still down mining toward the void, I carried on hopes to get home, and on day 24, I finally made it out of the treacherous depths. I crafted a centrifuge and placed it down, giving me the ability to drain the combs for honey and other resources. The centrifuge was collecting a lot of honey, so I used a bucket to scoop it up, and then used some of the glass I had smelting away to craft bottles so I could make bottles of honey. Night came faster than I imagined, so I decided to sleep. Day 25 came around and I obtained the honey bottles that I spoke about before, which I later used to craft bee cages. I returned to the Bumble Zone with an objective to collect more bees for my apiary. With 2 new bees in my possession, I attempted to return home, but once again encountered the time constraint, and as the timer reached 0, I once again had to struggle for hours to get home. After a lot of effort, I successfully reached the safety of my island and commenced construction of a designated bee area. I spent hours on trying to build it up, but with the honeycomb blocks reaching a low amount, I decided to sleep. I completed the construction of the infusion circle on day 26. And very quickly used it to craft stone and wood seeds. I devoted some time to the bee area and made sure it looked nice on day 27. I introduced the bees to an advanced beehive, then managed to finish the breeding quest, which rewarded us with a QB spawn egg. I couldn't figure out what the QB did, so I slept for the rest of the night. Day 28 began by unraveling how the building gadget worked, and I finally used it to build a platform for my future Create mod ventures. Once complete, I set up a watermill and encased fan to blast wash some ores. The start of the next day didn't go too well. I unexpectedly faced a creeper attack that damaged the land around me, but we quickly made repairs. When the repairs were finished, I went back to finish the watermill setup and blast wash some magma blocks into obsidian. Seizing my new opportunity, I built up another portal and ventured into the new dimension, where I retrieved some lava and elusive ores such as cobalt. After almost dying, I decided to escape back home and seek security in my new comfy bed. I carried on mining the 1 block on day 30 and managed to finish the magic bundle phase, transitioning to the abyss. Eager to progress even further, I attempted to speed through the abyss, but nearly exhausted the durability of my trusty Paxel in the process. So I stopped mining and decided to sleep. Determined to acquire more quartz and valuable ores, I ventured back into the nether on day 31. Collecting whatever I could and returned home to sleep the fears away. Day 32 was a bee day. I thought the living conditions for the bees were a bit poor, so I worked on making necessary improvements to the bee dome. I moved on to do more mining and eventually concluded the Abyss phase. Now we were in the Bumble Zone phase, which was perfect timing. I kept mining, collecting any bee that came out as a result, and eventually settled into my bed. Resuming my efforts, I set up the millstone once again and embarked on a mission to gather enough gravel to finish the quest. I later crafted a petal apothecary, the start of my deep dive into Botania. I used the new apothecary to craft a pure daisy, useful for changing blocks, and placed it down in the crop area, then slept to start the early morning grind. I continued my gravel gathering endeavours, getting as much as I could on day 34 and blasting it to build up my iron reserves. I used these new resources to craft an iron seed, which are really useful. I delved deeper into magical practices and crafted endoflames, a mana spreader, a mana pool, and a wand of the forest, the start of a basic mana station setup. I then went back to the apothecary and crafted an orchard, which turns basic stone into valuable ores. Before I slept, I quickly tested the orchid, and it worked extremely well. We carried on our magical journey on day 35, and began by dropping a hay bale into the mana pool, which transformed into a sugarcane. I used some of the recently collected nether quartz to make a seed, allowing me to avoid the nether for simple quartz gathering. I blast washed some sand to gather as much clay as I could, then crafted some water seeds and got in my bed to prepare for a restful sleep. I used the clay I had gathered to continue production of botany pots, and used the orchid once again in hopes of more iron. When sorting out the botany pots, I encountered a small mishap as I got the water seed out and it fell into the void, but luckily we had another spare from its production. After that unfortunate event, I retired back to my bed. I was eagerly hoping for a stroke of luck and used the orchid once again in the pursuit of more diamonds, but sadly the chances were not in my favour and I left with no diamonds to my name. However, whilst looking through the quests within my reach, I collected the rewards and obtained another set of diamonds. I scrolled over the quest lines and saw the one for honeycombs, and oh my lord, the amount of bees I am yet to collect is insane, and after that find, I slept with dreams of what could become. With the diamonds I had gathered, I crafted another lasso and seized the opportunity to capture a blaze from the nether. Once caught, I took it home and placed it within the mob farm, in hopes to obtain blaze rods. but once again they dropped blaze powder instead. With disappointment in mind, I embarked on dismantling the existing beehive, making way for a new and improved design. With my tools on the line toward breaking, I repaired my trusty ruby paxil and carried on. I worked through the night, and before the day rolled over, I slept through the rest of the darkness. Focusing on the real design of a beehive, I dedicated my efforts into refining and perfecting their structure, and on day 39, I worked on building the new bee area. We were quickly running out of honeycomb blocks, so I took to the one block and secured a plentiful supply for even more. As night was crawling faster and faster, I decided to seek solace and rest in my bed. Harnessing the power of the orchid, I used its capabilities until the pool depleted of all the mana stored away. I was hungry for another adventure and went into the nether for more ores. I took the journey back home and crafted a quartz bee nest, which I took back to the nether once again and utilised some honey treats to reduce the time between bee interactions. Once the timer hit 0, a crystalline bee manifested into existence. However, the bottle in my hand had some trouble getting it to fit, and it escaped my grasp. Eager to capture it again, I crafted and armed myself with bee cages, went back and began my rescue mission, which ended in success. As I took my new friend back to the home, I rested a peaceful night's sleep. I started the next day by setting up the crystalline bee in the first fully built honey cell, letting him chill out in his new home. I left him be and crafted additional clay to expand my collection of botany pots. I built up a second bee enclosure and introduced regular bees into their new home. In need of more lava, I ventured into the treacherous nether and had to make a narrow escape after a close call with death. I used the newly gathered lava to craft fire seeds, which ended up being an extremely useful thing to make. Before the day ended, I quickly journeyed to the Bumble Zone and gathered as many honeycombs as I could before returning home and sleeping. I set up a third bee home on day 43. And embarked on yet another adventure into the nether in search for more crystalline bees. Once the new bee had been acquired, I returned home and put him away. With stone in my hand, I used the power of the orchid to obtain more prosperity shards, then milled some iron to prepare for upcoming projects. As the day came to an end, I retired to my bed and enjoyed a well-deserved rest. I utilised the orchard once again to acquire even more prosperity shards. Unfortunately, whilst fiddling around with the bee home, I managed to lose a crystalline bee, prompting me to return to the nether for a replacement. Once gathered, I then worked diligently to craft a bee incubator to craft specific bee eggs and slept for the night. Day 45 began by crafting ruby seeds and ensuring that the endo flames were adequately fueled for a constant source of mana. I used the orchid once again to obtain both iron and prosperity shards. I ended the day by collecting the honey products from my bee friends and embraced a restful night's sleep. I assembled a bottler, which allowed me to bottle honey and even squash bee juice, but we will get back to that. I continued using the orchid to gather more iron, then crafted blueprints for a helmet and leggings. I bulk washed some more magma blocks for obsidian and used that, as well as many other gemstones, to make a fairly weak set of armor. Realizing that I had been a little dumb, I gathered the drops from my iron seeds and made a lot of iron. For as long as it was still bright, I used the orchid once again and commenced work on a mob farm. Darkness came upon me a lot faster than I thought, so we couldn't quite finish the mob farm and I decided to sleep. I continued to dedicate time and effort to the construction of the mob farm, creating a cobblestone generator to assist in the supply of building materials. I went back and forth from the generator to the mob farm until after several hours it was finally complete. I tested the capabilities of what this farm could do, and I was extremely happy with the results. To celebrate, I made an OP machete and tested it out on the mobs, and was delighted to see how strong it was. I then retired to my bed to sleep. I needed some more prosperity shards on day 51, and utilised the orchid to obtain some more, giving the access to finally craft a prosperity, a remarkable feat in my journey. I ventured back into the Bumble Zone, gathering any combs that I could. I got lucky this time and managed to acquire some iron, diamond, electrum, and elementium combs before heading home and sleeping. I encountered my first Enderman and managed to obtain an Ender Pearl. I crafted some Imperium farmland and finally planted my ruby seed, as well as planted pumpkins and other crops that I could use for breeding my animals. When skimming through quests, I collected some rewards and acquired skeleton and creeper seeds. I then collected the combs from my beehives and drifted into a peaceful slumber. I ventured into the nether in search of blazes on day 53, as I was still in desperate need for blaze rods, but when I slaughtered them, it sadly didn't drop what I needed. My efforts were not in vain, however, as I went back to the portal and collected another crystalline bee, which I took home with me. Once home, I crafted a glowstone nest along with a dart nest to get some new types of bees for my collection. We encountered a small setback, however, as a creeper dropped from above and exploded the beehive, so I had to repair the damages as quick as possible before the bees escaped. I made sure the bees were safe and went along to slap a bee with a source gem to create a mana bee before I slept in the night. I managed to use the reserve obsidian to craft an obsidian seed, then dedicated some time to the mob farm, seeing how much Inferium I could gather. I patiently waited for the dirt nest to provide a new bee, and after some time, I acquired a chocolate mining bee. Honey blocks were once again in a shortage, so I went back to the Bumble Zone and collected as many as I could. Before coming home and working on even more beehives for my bee buddies. I placed the chocolate mining bee in his new home and began work on another bee comb for the mana bee. For the next set of days, I focused my efforts on constructing an area for my villagers. I wanted to give the villagers some jobs, so I made sure that the land created was a trading station. It took some time, but eventually the villager trading station was complete, so I began transferring the villagers, which was a librarian for first, and cycling through his trades before hitting the jackpot. I managed to get a mending villager and kept him hostage for me to use whenever I needed. I went back to my other villagers and created a temporary breeder for me to breed more of my minions. With the emeralds I had stored away, I managed to get my first mending book before I slept. I began day 61 by mining some more of the one block, mainly to see how many honeycombs I could get. A honey slime spawned and I used the lasso to make him mine, and I later put him in the diamond mob farm to ensure a steady supply of slime balls. The mining continued until we finally progressed to the nether phase. I kept mining until blaze spawned, and this time when I slaughtered it, we finally received their blaze rod. I rested in my bed right after as my day was complete. I kept mining for the next day until another blaze spawned and I captured it with the lasso. I quickly put mending on my paxel just in case it were to break, and then attempted to put the blaze into the mob farm. I waited to see if it would drop me blaze rods, and I'm very happy to say that it did. I let the mob farm do its thing and went over to check on the bees whilst collecting their combs. With the blaze rods the farm had gathered, I snatched them up and crafted some mana pearls from the mana pool, and finally constructed the alchemy catalyst. Once the catalyst had been placed under the mana pool, I managed to transform some cactus and planted it into a botany pot. I concluded the day with a peaceful slumber. I began a busy day by crafting a metallurgic infuser. This block needed power, so I crafted a heat generator to power the infuser. Again as much stone as it would possibly take, and while I waited for the transformation of the block, I placed down another mana spreader setup to speed up the process. The blocks were taking a little while to transform, so I retired back to my bed and rested. Day 65 started and I used my sword to harvest the large tree, using the wood I gathered to fuel the endo flames for more mana. The blocks had finally fully transformed and I began mining all the ores before sleeping. I commenced construction of a crude blast furnace on day 66, getting the bricks I needed to build it up. I crafted a prudentium furnace to speed up the smelting process, then successfully made the blast furnace, inputting the correct resources needed and achieved my first steel ingot. After a great day, I slept to make sure that I was ready for the next adventure. The power from the heat generator was not reaching the metallurgic infuser, so I fabricated some cables in hopes that this would fix the issue. I washed some osmium to obtain the nuggets. I produced some basic control units and crafted an enrichment chamber, which was later set up, allowing us to make diamonds. To end the day, I began the production of processors for a storage project before sleeping. I used some iron that we had spare to craft some quartz-enriched iron, and continued working on the storage project by fabricating a storage controller, disk drive, and a crafting grid. I used the heat generator to provide power to the new storage system, and quickly examined the recipe for the 4K disk drive before resting. I skimmed through the chests and managed to craft some silicon seeds, an essential resource for making disk drives. The seeds were quickly put to use as I successfully crafted a 4K disk drive, which enabled us to begin the storage transition tomorrow. The heat generator itself wasn't enough to power our storage system, so I crafted a solar panel to provide a constant source of renewable power. I walked on over to the villager trading station and saw that the mending villager had been infected, so I had to fix him. I crafted nature seeds and used fertilizer to kickstart the growth process. Then crafted a weakness potion and a golden apple, successfully beginning the healing process for our villager. Before he was fully healed, however, I decided to sleep. I transferred another villager to the trading area and cycled through the trades until I came across a protection 4 villager. So I kept him hostage and made a quick check on the newly healed villager. His trades went down significantly and we can now get mending Mon for 1 emerald. That's crazy. I took advantage of the trade and bought myself 5 books before going back to the mainland and using the bottler to crush Prospera bees into a bottle, which could later be used for something important. I concluded the day with a well-deserved rest. I shoved the squashed bee bottle into the centrifuge and extracted some sets of DNA, which included the Prospera bee gene. I made a quick trip to the nether and placed down the glowstone nest, which I gave some honey treats to speed up the process. I caged all the bees that came out and created another Prospera bee. which later got crushed into a bottle. I wanted to breed some bees, but I didn't have enough flowers, so I decided to bone meal one before sleeping. Day 73 began by employing the bottler to convert honey into honey treats, thinking it would be cheaper to mass produce them. I fed the gold and quartz nest to produce another set of necessary bees. The crystalline bee spawned and escaped my grasp, but luckily I managed to save it just in time. I used the new bee to create a Prospera bee and slept for the night. I crushed the new Prospera bee to obtain more gene samples and decided to revisit the Bumble Zone. On my adventure, I attacked the bee by accident, causing an army of bees to cause my unfortunate demise. I returned back and retrieved my items before heading home and sleeping. I returned to the Nether on day 75 to gather as many crystalline bees as I could. Once obtained, I ventured back home and converted the captured bees into Prospera bees, which later got crushed in the bottler for more gene samples. With the samples I had managed to save, I formulated an 89% Prospera bee gene sample. Using that, I merged it with a honey treat and placed it into the incubator in hopes for a new bee spawn egg. Before I could see the results, however, night came on quick, so I decided to sleep. I stood by the incubator waiting for it to operate, but unfortunately it failed to produce the expected results. I slammed my head into the beehive and revisited the Bumble Zone to acquire some puffballs and honeycomb blocks. During my adventure, I accidentally agitated a bee and had to make a hasty retreat back home before the bee killed me. I regained my health back and ate some food before going back inside the Bumble Zone, where once again, accidentally agitating the bee around me, this time meeting my demise. Making my third trip of the day, I went back to retrieve my lost items and returned home to conclude the day in my bed. Day 77 began by introducing a Fletcher villager to the trading area for an easy and convenient way to get emeralds. I crafted a pokey upgrade that I put inside the advanced bee nest. I commenced the smelting of more steel as I need it for a project, then rested in my bed to recharge for tomorrow. The pokies were working wonders, so on day 78 I crafted even more, hoping to get a quick 100% gene sample. I went back to the Nether and gathered as many crystalline bees as I could, which once again got crushed and extracted for their genes. I deposited them into the indexer, and as night was coming quick, I engaged in crop farming throughout the night into day 79. I collected all the crops and put them into storage, then collected the gene samples from my bee friends and put them into the indexer. I checked out the stored samples and saw we had a 100% Prospera bee gene sample. So with this, I attempted the incubator one more time and successfully made a Prospera bee egg. The egg went straight into the infusion altar and, with some Inferium blocks, crafted an Inferium bee spawn egg. Similar to the Inferium, I did the exact same with the Prudentium and made the tier 2 egg. I attempted to go for the third tier, tertium, but had a lack of inferium, so I took the Modpack and captured as many of them as I could, whilst also grinding XP for my tools to repair themselves. Day 80, we're almost there. I placed the collected gold bees into a new home and made sure that they were all settled in before sleeping. I worked on acquiring 2 more crystalline bees to attempt something. Before sleeping, I used the glass I started smelting to work on a bee breeding dome. I carried on construction of the bee dome and eventually finished it. I made the place look better with some grass and flowers before putting the crystalline bees inside and attempting to breed them. And it was successful. I realized I wasted a lot of time and honey treats on them bees. I ended the long day by building up another honeycomb home for the bees and sleeping. I crushed even more Prospera bees for gene samples on day 83, and placed them all into the gene indexer to automatically merge. I thought about making some power for Create, so I built up a windmill before settling down. I carried on the Create shenanigans and made a speed creation to get the mixer working. I crafted a casing and captured a blaze, giving me a blaze burner. I broke the block under the mixer and set up the burner, which I then fed some coal and used it to mix up some brass for future builds. As the night started to settle in, I crafted and set up a press, allowing me to get iron and gold plates. Days 85 and 86 was spent mainly working on even more Create. I crafted the necessary blocks to build up a mechanical crafter, a machine that automatically chops down crops for me to take. I spent a few hours setting it up and making sure that it worked well with the storage sector. I tested the harvester with some inferium seeds and it worked perfectly. I made a small platform underneath the crops and installed growth accelerators to speed up the process. I obtained another villager to put in my trading area and cycled through the librarian trades until I came across a Fortune 3 trade. I needed emeralds, so I produced a large quantity of sticks and traded them all. I ended the day by converting some of the harvester dirt into inferium farmland and slept. I wanted to build a big smelter, so on day 88 I began the process and crafted grout that later got smelted down. I upgraded some of the farmland in the harvester to the next level, Prudentium. Then set up the basic components of a small smeltery. I used this setup to smelt some copper and made myself a smeltery controller before setting down for the night. I continued work on the smeltery before going to my beehives and placing down the Prudentium bee. I laid down some more seared bricks for the smeltery and kept filling up the furnace with grout. I crafted even more Prudentium farmland for the harvester and then slept. I checked the indexer on day 90 and saw that we had another 100% Prospera bee gene sample, so I snatched it up and put it inside the incubator. This granted me with another egg, which I transformed into an inferium bee. And placed it down with its tier 2 brother. I ended the day by adding more seared bricks into the smeltery and calling it a night. Work on the smeltery continued, and on day 91 I finally finished the first few layers, making it now functional. I conducted some tests on the smeltery and everything seemed to be working fine. I added some more Prudentium farmland to the mechanical harvester, and decided to craft another 4K drive, which allowed me to start sorting more items into the system. I continued sorting chests into day 92. The storage was getting a bit full, so I decided to craft another 3 drives, depositing more and more between each installation. Once all the drives were in place, I went over to the bees and collected combs, mainly from the Inferium and Prudentium bees. I grabbed some more clay to smelt down for terracotta and made some more seared bricks for smeltery. I went to use the storage system at night, but it went offline due to it being dark, so I decided to sleep. I collected all of the bees' combs once again and put them straight into the centrifuge, before running to the harvester and putting the last bit of Prudentium farmland down. Since that was done, we began working on making it tier 3 and turning the crop's land into tertium. To help assist with this, And for more seeds, I made 6 more Inferium botany pots and slept. I was in desperate need of creosote oil, so I set up and made a coke oven and put some fuel in to passively create the product. I made some more tertium farmland and slept early, ready for a busy day tomorrow. The breeding dome was looking a little empty, so I transferred a couple bees and bred them until a little baby redstone bee spawned. I made another bee comb home and put a spruce nest inside. Gave it some honey treats and waited for the timer to hit 0. Once this happened, a risen and a blue banded bee popped out, so I grabbed my cages and snatched them up, keeping them for future use. I grabbed the creosote oil from the coke oven and made an engineer's crafting table. Enabling me to take a villager to the trading area and turn him into an engineer for some good trades. I went to the bee dome on day 96 and bred another set of redstone bees. I kept mining the 1 block hoping to reach the end by 100 days and managed to complete the nether phase. I continued my mining activities into the end phase and temporarily making journeys over to the mob farm to repair my tools. I collected the combs from the bees and placed them all into the centrifuge before obtaining all the Inferium seeds out of the botany pots and planting them in the harvester setup. With the Inferium from the plants, I upgraded them to tertium and leveled up the farmland of the harvester before going to sleep. I continued mining on day 97 and managed to finally complete the All Ores Mined quest and obtained a Terra Shatterer as a reward. I kept mining to complete as many quests as I could until I encountered possibly the weirdest looking creature I have ever seen. With that distraction out of the way, I carried on and concluded the end phase, transitioning to the all-in-one phase, which was every phase prior in one. For the rest of the day, I just kept mining, hoping to get as many ores as I could before sleeping. Once again, I carried on mining until my tools couldn't take it anymore. I took a small break to breed a new set of bees and managed to obtain a lapis bee. I slapped the harvester dirt with some more tertium and collected the Inferium seeds that were later planted. The ores I gathered from mining were soon smelted, and whilst they were cooking up, I decided to carry on my mining venture before sleeping. I was in desperate need of nether quartz, and I'm too lazy to go into the nether looking for them, So on day 99, I dropped a couple blaze rods into the mana pool to transform them into what I needed. I collected my Inferium seeds once again and planted them. The smeltery worked well, but I kept having to reset it, as I kept getting stuck in the ingot casting, so I changed the plate into a nugget plate, and ran it once more. I managed to obtain a 100% Inferium gene and initiated the incubation process and began planting a lot more seeds whilst it happened. I teched in on my bees and collected their combs, which I put into the centrifuge. I had a lot of quests that were finished, so I checked through them and managed to complete the Abyss chapter. I wanted to carry on with the day, but the storage system went offline, so I decided to sleep. Day 100 was finally here. To finish the farmland chapter, I needed a lot of rice, so I planted one and used bone meal on it until I had enough to finish the quest. I collected my rewards and managed to complete the farmland chapter. I felt a bit magic at this point, so I worked on crafting a token enchanter to craft a specific item, as well as a resonating wand to begin my wizardry. Night was coming along quicker than I thought, so I collected the nuggets from the smeltery, placed the newly gathered combs into the centrifuge, and decided to sleep for the last night of the video. So there we have it, 100 days complete. I didn't achieve everything I wanted to, but maybe that's a cause for a second video, who knows. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed joining along with this adventure, and if you did, then please consider liking, subscribing, and comment down below what video you'd love to see next. So until next time, stay adventurous and stay hydrated. My name is Newbie, and I'll see you in the next one.